Okay, it's 6 p.m. We'll call our meeting to order. Start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can you have a roll call, please, Maureen?
Mr. Davis?
Yeah.
Mr. Bembo?
Here.
Mrs. Head?
Here.
Mrs. Rail?
Here.
Mrs. Medina?
Here.
Mr. Cranes?
Here.
Mr. Beard?
Here.
Thank you, Maureen. First item on our agenda tonight is our student representative recognition. Jacqueline, would you like to come forward? We have this plaque for you that states an appreciation for service and leadership to the students of the Wisconsin Rapids Public Schools and serving as student representative to the Wisconsin Rapids Board of Education. It's been a pleasure working with you.
Thank you.
What are your future plans?
Well, I will be attending UW-Madison with a microbiology major.
Awesome. Well, best of luck, and we hope that
Thank you.
if you're bored Monday night, you want to stop back. And our new student rep is?
So this is Rachel Martin, and she will be the new student rep.
Welcome, Rachel. Look forward to working with you and having you in our meetings. Maybe at some point our tables will be like this, but for now, this is what we're doing. So thank you. Thank you, Jacqueline. Best of luck. And we have one district retiree here tonight. Lori Thompson, would you please come forward? Oh, two. Okay, I didn't see you. Snuck in. Sorry. Mary snuck in late. Or right at the end. Hi, Lori.
Hi.
Lori Thompson has been a music teacher with the Wisconsin Rapids Public Schools for the past 30 years. She's worked at 6 different elementary buildings during this time frame, and most recently at Washington and Think. Think Academy Principal Roxanne Field states, every year Lori took great pride in organizing the Think Academy Christmas program. The program grew to such numbers that it soon had to be moved to the Performing Arts Center at Lincoln High School. In its first year there, the event was standing room only, all a testament to the hard work and dedication Lori brought to her students and this special event. I am so glad that I had the chance to work with Lori the past 5 years. Her passion for music and the positive effect it can have on students is admirable. Lori will genuinely be missed in the Wisconsin Rapids District. Outside of work, Lori's love of music keeps her involved as a music director with Sandy County Players, and she is also a Sunday school teacher at her church. In retirement, Lori hopes to volunteer, travel, and spend time with family, especially her grandchildren. Thank you, Lori, for your years of service to WRPS. We wish you all the best.
Thank you.
And from State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Carolyn Stanford Taylor, is a recognition of commitment and service presented to Lori J. Thompson in recognition of 30 years of commitment and service to the education and well-being of our young people. These contributions are acknowledged with this expression of grateful appreciation. Anything you'd like to say?
I just appreciate the opportunity. I loved working for the district and the family that I got to know and grow here.
How about a song?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Best of luck in your retirement. Mary Schultz, would you like to come forward? Every year this is bittersweet. It's wonderful. People are moving into retirement, but we lose so much talent and experience. It's very hard to replace. Welcome, Mary. Mary Schultz is retiring from her position as guidance counselor at Lincoln High School. Mary began her career in the district in 1987, and during her time here, she has worked at Howe, Think, Vesper, Washington, and Fitch. Lincoln Principal Ron Rasmussen states, Mary will be missed by all of the students and staff at Lincoln. As a strong student advocate, our Cool to Be Kind organization is like none other in the state of Wisconsin. With the focus on making Lincoln an open and accepting environment, she has led it further than imagined a decade ago. With the new student luncheons, the value of diversity and growth of our foreign exchange program, and the Rise to Remember Night, Mary has made Lincoln a true place of acceptance. In her spare time, Mary enjoys gardening and antiquing and hopes to do some mission work in retirement. Thank you, Mary, for the positive and strong connections you have made with students at all levels throughout your years of service at WRPS. We wish you the very best in your retirement. And from State Superintendent Carolyn Stanford Taylor, recognition of commitment and service presented to Mary F. Schultz in recognition of 33 years of commitment and service to the educational well-being of our young people. These contributions are acknowledged with this expression of grateful appreciation. Thank you, Mary. Anything you'd like to say?
Once again, thank you. It's been a great year. I mean, when I started out here, I thought, I'll be here for a few years. And that many years later, here we are. So it's been a wonderful time working with some of the great people that we have in this district. It's a wonderful place to work. So keep up the good things that we do, and hopefully I'll be back to do some things here too. So
Excellent. We look forward to
hopefully.
seeing you.
I thank you.
Okay, we can now move on to approval of the minutes.
I would make a motion to approve the regular Board of Education meeting minutes of June 8th, 2020.
We have a motion and a second to approve the regular Board of Education meeting minutes of June 8, 2020. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries, minutes are approved. Next item, comments from citizens and delegations. Do we have any, Marie?
No.
Okay, thank you. We can move into committee reports, educational services.
Okay, Educational Services Committee met for their monthly meeting on Monday, July 6th. There were 6 consent agenda items. Does anyone want any of these held up? All right, then I will make a motion to accept the following. ES1, that the administration accept the pupil academic standards that will be in effect for the 2020-21 school year as presented. Changes were noted in world language, and updates to English language arts, physical education, and personal financial literacy are being reviewed. ES2 was to approve the BEST grant application for the 2020-21 school year. Highlights of how this grant was used for the 2019-20 school year was reported on. ES3, to approve the Title VI of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the Indian Education Grant application for the 2020-21 school year. Much of this grant pays for the Title VI Native American liaison salary. The remaining funds were used for school supplies and books for a school library written by Native American authors. The same priorities are planned for the 2020-21 school year, with also purchasing student Chromebooks for Native American students to check out as needed. ES4 was to approve the Education for Homeless Children and Youth Grant application for the 2020-23 school years. We have just completed our final year of the 3-year grant. Academic achievement for homeless students increased while absences decreased. Families were helped obtain Badger Care and rent assistance, and gas cards were provided to families to attend school-related activities such as parent night. ES5 was to approve the purchase of the 110 Acellus Academy licenses to be used during the 2019-2020 LHS summer school program. This program is being used at Lincoln High School for summer school credit recovery instruction, and this year the number of licenses needed is higher because of COVID-19. More students may use this virtually during the 2021 school year if COVID-19 impacts us. E6 was to approve the purchase of Seesaw for schools for a 3-year period at a total cost of $35,268.75 from the technology and curriculum budgets, with 50% of total cost being paid in year 1 and 25% of total cost being paid in each subsequent year, for a total savings of $1,856.25. This will be used as a uniform platform for instructional tools and communication between 4K through 5th grade classroom teachers and their students and families. Seesaw is currently being successfully used by many teachers. And, let me do that first. Or do I go through the whole thing? Next, the updates?
Well, we have to vote on this.
Yeah, okay. So with that, yeah, I miss that motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve ES1 through ES6. Can we have roll call, please, Marie?
Mrs. Heck?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Medina?
Yes.
Mr. Cranes?
Yes.
Mrs. Raymond?
Yes.
Mr. Beer?
Yes.
Mr. Bembo?
Yes.
Thank you, Marie.
Okay, then under updates, we had the achievement gap reduction end of the year report. Because of school closures due to COVID-19, schools were unable to complete end-of-year assessments in math and reading. Therefore, data is not available. A statement on the report was required by the Department of Public Instruction, showing how the district provided off-campus learning to students and which online resources, if any, were used to provide this instruction. Second was behavior and mental wellness grant end-of-the-year report. WRPS had just completed year 1 of a 2-year behavior and mental wellness grant. Over 85 families were connected with mental health resources. Grades 6 and 9 students were screened with signs of suicide, the SOS. 8 of our schools have a community mental health provider on site. 3 parent community nights were held, presenting on a variety of topics. And next, preferred driver education contract. With the expiration of the contract with preferred driver education in July 2020, WRPS will no longer enter into a driver education contract with one company and will not list a preferred vendor for driver education courses. Students and families will be provided with a listing of local vendors who offer online instruction. All driver education agreements will then be between the parent-student and the private vendor with no connection to the school. LHS will no longer provide classroom space for in-person instruction. LHS students may choose to complete their online driver's education coursework during any scheduled study hall. Students may also continue to complete their behind-the-wheel training during the scheduled study hall if needed. No credit will be given. And our last item was a possible referendum. Craig opened the discussion by stating that the timing of the referendum may not be good given many factors, COVID-19, Versa closure, etc. However, regardless of other factors, the district is at a point where a levy override referendum to continue to fund necessary curriculum and technology expenditures remains. Members were provided with background information containing details regarding the use of referendum dollars from the referendum approved by voters in 2006. A result of effective business management, curriculum and technology purchases were made through 2020 using those dollars from the referendum. Those referendum dollars are now depleted, making the need for another levy override referendum question to voters necessary. In addition, the district has been proactive with a fairly aggressive approach to debt defeasance, which saves taxpayers money while significantly decreasing the amount the district owes. Based on the current school funding formula in Wisconsin, it can be somewhat advantageous to the district to have a certain level of debt payments. This fact, in conjunction with the need to modify and renovate entrances on all facilities that house students for additional safety and security, as well as significant modifications to the second floor of LHS and other areas, Craig also outlined the possibility of asking voters an additional question for a possible bond issue referendum in the amount of $20 million or $30 million. Committee members were provided with tax impact scenarios for the levy override question, as well as the levy override question and a bond issue question if approved. Options were discussed, and it was agreed that this is something to bring before the full board at the regular meeting on July 13th. And with that, I make a motion to accept the Ed Services Committee meeting minutes of July 6th, 2020.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the meeting minutes of the Educational Service Committee of July 6, 2020. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Minutes are approved. Thank you, Mary.
Welcome, John.
We will move on to business services. John.
Thank you, John. Business Services met on July 6, 2020. We called our meeting to order at 7:12 p.m. We had no public comment. Out of our meeting, we had 2 consent agenda items. Did anybody want anything held out on that? Okay, hearing nothing. We'll talk about BS1, which is the interdistrict 66.03.01 interdistrict agreements for our virtual program. Out of that, we have candidates from Adams, Friendship, Crandon, DC, Everest, Kimberly, Port Edwards, Spencer, Stevens Point, Stratford, Tri-County, and Watoma, as listed right now. And on the motion, there were 74 students that are coming to our district. And if you take a look at the bills or the receipts, the 6603 brought in just over $500,000 into our district by having these agreements to help basically run that our virtual program is bringing money in. Again, it was like $552,000. We will continue to have these as students add on. It's not probably every month we'll have a couple more requests for the virtual program. The second talk we had, or item we had, is computer purchase for the Lincoln High School Technology Education Lab, which is in room 131. The motion was made for purchase of 33 computers from PDS at a cost of $32,802, which will be funded from the 2021 technology budget. That works out to be about $994 a computer, which is pretty good because these computers have to be loaded to run multiple software programs, plus with the Windows 7 being not supported anymore. A lot of the manufacturers are no longer making software that, plus a lot of the software programs. I think there were some different lab programs. Let me see, it was listed. Higher level computers needed the lab due to the nature of its use. These computers can run CAD software, the Adobe suite of programs, and several other high-end software programs. So that's why those were being upgraded. So I move and the committee recommends that we approve both of these purchases, A and B.
Second.
We have a motion, a second to approve BS1 and BS2. We have roll call, please, ma'am?
Mrs. Rayle?
Yes.
Mrs. Hutt?
Yes.
Mr. Krings?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Beer?
Yes.
Mrs. Medina?
Yes.
Mr. Bembo?
Yes. Then we had updates and reports. We had a purchases update, which was our Skyward software program for student management and food service. And that does have the special education module that we used to buy or purchase from them out, removed from that purchase. Then we also had an auditor engagement letter from, which is an auditing firm confirming our auditor's job. And the most important part of this is there was 8 pages of fine reading. But the opinion at the end is the most important part. And it's, in their opinion, firms can receive a rating of pass with deficiencies, or fail. Hawkins Ash CPAs LLP has received a peer rating of pass. So along with that, Dan and his group did also pass very well. So we got good ratings from our CPA. With that, I move to approve the remaining of our business services minutes.
Second.
We have a motion, a second to approve the committee meeting minutes of the Business Service Committee of July 6, 2020. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Minutes are approved. I was having a conversation yesterday with a logger, and he brought up something that's always near and dear to you, our paper purchase.
Yeah.
And he was saying that they're hurting, with the Verso announcement. That's going to have a huge impact on the logging. And he was talking about the impact to Domtar. That Domtar has stated that if schools don't open in this fall, it could potentially close some of their mills down because they make a lot of colored paper that's used in school buildings. And so the impact of what goes on here is pretty far-reaching, more than we think. Thanks for the report, John. Business services, or personnel, I'm sorry, Sandy?
Don't confuse me.
No, we just had that one.
Okay, personnel services met last Monday. We called the meeting order at 7:12, and from that meeting we have 9 consent agenda items. Does anybody want anything held out? I'd like to hold out 1 and 6. The second one, the committee recommends, and I move to approve the 4 support staff appointments. 3, the committee recommends, and I move to approve the 51 2020 summer school support staff appointments. Number 4, the committee recommends, and I move to approve the 1 non-represented staff early retirement. And his wife said that was okay if he did retire, I asked her. 5, the committee recommends, and I move to approve the 2 professional staff resignations. 7, the committee recommends, and I move to approve the hiring of a digital, media, and visual coordinator position for the district with a salary based on skills and work experience not to exceed $60,000. This will be a 260-day contract. Help Eric in the PAC, and this is like taking Rich Larson's position, which he was all over every place all the time. 8, the committee recommends, and I move to approve a 5% academic co-curricular live stream advisor position at Lincoln High School. This person would be like perhaps live streaming some events if we're not going to have people there. This will be a year-long position, and that's like 5% of $38,000, which comes to $1,900 for this position. And 9th, the committee recommends, and I move to approve a $1,500 stipend for the 2020-2021 school year for the elementary library media specialist position. This may be reviewed annually. This person covers 7 elementary buildings at the elementary level, plus she has Century Oaks Academy, so she's very busy. She's through the entire district.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion, a second to approve PS 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, and 9. Can we have roll call, please, ma'am?
Mr. Krings?
Yes.
Mrs. Rayle?
Yes.
Mr. Beer?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Medina?
Yes.
Mr. Bembo?
Yes.
Mrs. Hutt?
Yes. On PS1 If you look at the third name down, that person has not going to be coming with our district, so we will only have 4 professional staff appointments. So with that, I move, and the committee recommends to approve the 4 professional staff appointments.
Second.
And we have a motion and a second to approve the 4 professional staff appointments. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Okay.
Motion carries.
Number 6, which I asked to be held out, we had a discussion on the employee handbook revision concerning COVID-19. And we had quite a good discussion. There were a lot of changes that we talked about. And at this point in time, I can't vote on it because I haven't had a chance to review this document that we were presented tonight. So I guess, in my opinion, I'd like to go over it before I vote on it. I don't know how the other ones feel, but that's why I'm asking it to be held out.
Can we move this to the August meeting? Does that create any problems with the start of school year?
It's going to create an issue for communicating with employees about what the baseline expectations may be. But I do think that even barring board action, we could probably preemptively send out an email communication indicating that this is yet to be board approved, but this is what is being put under consideration. At least they have the guidelines and the framework. And it's nothing groundbreaking. I think that part of the reason that the documentation wasn't there, Brian could speak to it as well, is as a result of miscommunication. So that was not intentional. Typically, you'll have that documentation in your packet for you, so you have time to review it prior to tonight's meeting. But ironically, a lot of it too may change because we are still seeking clarity on some of these topics via other school districts and legal commentary and so forth. So it would be awesome if it was approved tonight, but I think we could probably send and be very clear, large, bold block letters saying this is not yet board approved. However, a version or a very close version of this will be, before the board in August. I don't think that'll put us behind any specific significant deadline. And frankly, it'll probably change between now and then as well, which means by then you'll be approving, you would have seen it again in August anyhow. So I'd be stunned if it wouldn't be on the agenda again anyway. So that's a long-winded way of saying, I think we're okay.
And a lot of the conversation was around expectations of staff, like self-diagnosing before you leave the house in the morning. Do you have any of these symptoms? And if so, please stay home. So, that was a lot of the conversation we had.
And it wasn't substantive, technically, it was more cleanup and organizational. We didn't have debate about, you can't do this, we don't like this language because it asks employees to do X, Y, or Z. It's more along the lines of let's clean it up and make it more user-friendly and readable. And
Well, some of it had some repercussions in it.
Correct.
That we discussed.
Right. But point being is that there wasn't a massive debate around this is all wrong, we need to redo it.
No, not all wrong, no,
Yeah.
no. So should we just go ahead and table this for next? How do you want to handle that?
I think you can table it for next time, and if you're comfortable with us speaking on your behalf by simply saying this is before the board and is not formally approved as of yet, then I don't have a problem with Brian sending that email out.
I'd have no problem with that. I'd like to read it too. This is brand new, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, it's different from last week's.
Yep.
Yeah, so, and if he's gonna bring changes forward, anyhow, I think going forward with the idea that it's gonna be a document, but we want to make sure, I would like to see it too, because if you hadn't had it at the committee and it wasn't in our background, I'd like to read it.
Yeah. So, Brian, for reference, attachment A is what was included in go through what these are so that the board knows.
Where am I starting from? It's all,
A is the one with pardon me.
it's all A.
It's all A. My apologies. I thought there was more than the one copy.
No.
So also then in your packet is the original, in your committee packet, your personnel committee packet is the original, which is what you can compare this attachment A to. Then you'll understand the substance of our conversation as well.
But we didn't get the personnel. Didn't we?
So do we need a motion to table?
Was that in the background last week?
That
Yes.
was, yeah,
Yes.
committee
Okay.
background.
Yeah, it was in your
It was in your
background.
packet last week.
So yes, you should probably table it. We'll bring it back in August.
So I move that we table PS 6.
Second.
We have a motion in 2 seconds to table PS6 until the August meeting. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That item is tabled.
Okay, and with that, I move that the minutes from July 6, 2020 be approved as printed.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the meeting minutes of the Personnel Service Committee of July 6th. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The minutes are approved. Moving on. Thank you, Sandy. Next item, agenda referrals or information requests, and they have anything this month. Larry.
When you're sitting home and not getting haircuts and doing all of this, you think a lot. And I have a niece who's probably the finest orchestra teacher that I've ever known, and she sent me some information on what she had done during the summer when she was unable to teach. And she said, Larry, you won't believe the number of students who are stressed out and having all kinds of problems with the situation. And we have enough to do, for sure, during this time. But you know, if we could do something positive now and get it done right away, it might be, in the long run, a home run for us, because we prevent all of the suffering that goes with not getting those things taken care of. And I don't want to add another thing for us to do. I'm just wondering if we could kind of put that in our thinking so that staff and employees try and do those things that help kids get through this in a positive way. Stress and anxiety are helpful if there's a positive, something positive comes out of it. Otherwise, it can be lifelong problems. So if we can do something, it'd be nice to do it. I don't have any demand. I don't want someone to have to put a whole bunch of thought into this. But if we could put it into our thinking generally.
Would it be beneficial to share on the district web page some of the things that happened during the COVID shutdown? I mean, I think, you know, people in the community may not realize the level of education that continued, and, you know, like Larry talked to, you know, the contact teachers had with students, that, you know, kids were getting phone calls from teachers and emails daily to the parents. And we don't have a very good avenue to tell our story anymore, other than that district web page. You know, at least there we can control the content.
And on the radio, but not a lot of people listen to that anymore. Part of what you had is that behavioral and mental wellness grant we talked about, and pet services that where they're doing the signs of suicide, so they are doing some preventive stuff. And then there was also the that was it for this month, was that grant. So I mean, and we did talk about that, and it was talked about at the committee meeting about things that they're doing to try to help students. Mm-hmm. So I think the student, to answer your question, I think the district is doing things. But yeah, we could put something on the website and just make it.
Sometimes it's just staff people saying it, you know, watching kids and knowing when you gotta say, you know, is there something bothering you? And making those connections.
I know of the other website that you see advertised on TV, NAMI. It's NAMI, and if you go onto the website, you can get the 800 number and go to their website. It's a national mental health kind of like hotline. I've referred a couple of my employees to that, and a couple actually in the business next to me, I referred an employee to that as well. Part of that, you know, just the overall what's happening. You know, people are looking for something to talk to, but they want to do it anonymously, and they don't want to go to their HR people. A couple of the corporate people I've talked to, they don't want to go to their HR people, so I've referred them to that as far as a start.
Well, I think the Cool to Be Kind group, I know when I went to the presentations they had, and they had NAMI there. And they gave out information. The students have the information that they've given it out. But and I don't know if that's on our website, but I think could be an important group when school starts, and I think staff and parents, I really think that could be a good avenue.
Isn't that on the student ID?
Yeah, I think it will be, that information will be there.
But you know, some things are starting to become normal. The water park has opened up. We have swim lessons. We have summer school at the elementary level. That's starting some normalcy in the district. So I think that would help.
Yeah, these are the things that I'm thinking about as well, Larry, because, you know, and I would add to that stress for staff members too, you know, because we're all venturing into the great unknown, as it were. And I would absolutely be open to ideas that we as a community can come together around, you know, how we begin making progress of solving the problem, because solving our problems that we have here locally with respect to all of the things that are going on. I mean, ultimately, I think it's fairly well documented that having kids back in school is the where we need to be, but, you know, whether or not that's possible remains to be seen. We'll let local circumstances dictate. But I think in a general sense, being now that it's mid-July, we're not even at the peak of where the stress level is going to be for some of our kids and families and staff. And as we move closer and closer, you know, I think it's going to come to kind of a climax, and then we're going to start school in whatever capacity that looks like. And then after a couple of weeks, then I think it's finally going to start to come down. But one of the biggest issues is what that contact looks like. And we typically don't have a ton of student contact in the summertime, aside from summer school and other things, even in a normal year. So there's those issues that exist that are exacerbated over the summertime because of lack of contact. And you know, I don't know, is that commentary, and I know this wasn't your goal, but whenever these conversations are had, it wasn't the goal in your comment is what I'm saying, but whenever these conversations are had, I think in my mind is that more evidence for why we need to be going back to school 5 days a week with kids and teachers together in a safe capacity, as safe as we can possibly make it? Or is that more evidence that we got a long hill to climb and this is going to get worse before it gets better? And that, I mean, that encapsulates what the primary issue is here. You know what I mean? And that's the stress creating factor, in my opinion. And I don't know what we do with respect to how we relieve that, aside from let time pass, lay the best plans we can possibly make decisions based on all available information, and then see what happens as time progresses. And that's a terrifying thing to state, because of course the ramifications of this decision making can be pretty catastrophic, one would argue, or it may not be. I mean, these are the problems, right?
But the thing is too, that whichever decision you're gonna make, people are gonna stress out. Some people are gonna stress out if we don't go back to school, and some are gonna stress out if we do. So there's always gonna be stress and anxiety with any decision.
Well, and the bottom line is having those options, right? And then I also think about how do you deliver services, and I think this spring closure as a result of the pandemic very clearly illustrated that although we can do a lot of things and we can remain in contact, it's not the same as what we can do and what we do when kids are, you know, here in session. But, right, I mean, providing options is a foregone conclusion. But again, what does it look like? We're trying to predict the future. I mean, that's what the problem is, and I don't know any human being that's able to do that. But yeah, so again, that's a long-winded way of saying I agree with your point, and I struggle with that same thing, and in the broader perspective with staff members as well. Because
I think it's really important that, you know, that staff are as important to us as the students are. I mean, there's no one more, you know, and I think to respect each other. I mean, because you don't want to do something, and it's hard for people to do that. You know, well, I don't want to wear a mask. Well, I do. I mean, and we get the students and families in that environment. I mean, that's going to add tremendously. So if people can model, parents can, teachers can, and we know we're all in it together, I mean, I think it'll, you know.
As I was walking out the door to come to this meeting, I just 5:30 national news came on, and David Muir led with that right now Los Angeles schools will not open in the fall. Because unless the numbers change drastically.
San Diego is illegal.
Yeah, San Diego and all the major cities basically, they're saying there's no way we can start kids in schools in a month. So it all depends on what happens with the public as far as wearing the masks and that type of thing. So,
Yeah, this
Yeah.
is absolutely a community-based effort. That's a guarantee.
Thank you, Larry.
Another thing, you know, we talked about with the student IDs putting a suicide hot number on the back. They're now talking about it's going to the FCC or someplace that it's going to be a 3-digit number.
Yeah.
So I suppose after we get everything printed, then.
Yeah, then-
actually,
They'll let
the
us know.
3-digit number has been announced.
Huh?
The 3-digit number has been
Well,
announced,
I
so it
heard
can
it
be
tonight,
printed now.
yeah.
Whether they have the infrastructure to have it where you can actually dial it is another thing.
It hadn't been active yet.
Yeah,
But they're working on it,
the number's given, but it isn't
Yeah.
active.
like 988 or something, I don't know.
Okay. Nothing else, we'll move on to the legislative agenda. What's new this month, Troy?
So this month, we'll take a look at numerous different bills before the state and look at some national responses as well to the COVID pandemic. I want to start with stateside. On June 25th, the Assembly Education Committee met in Madison, chaired by Rep. Jeremy Theisfeld of the Fond du Lac area. The committee held an informational hearing to take invited testimony from school leaders regarding to returning to in-person instruction this fall. Multiple school board presidents and school leaders did testify, and WASB states that the testimony was compelling and it certainly gave lawmakers a picture of looking at the overall challenges and what decision-making needs to go into what schools will look like this fall. Some of the things that the committee touched base on that were heard throughout the hearing, that the overall goal is in-person instruction. Everybody recognizes that virtual learning is not ideal, and returning to in-person instruction in a safe way for students and staffs is the ultimate goal for the fall. This was the main takeaway from the committee chairman, who was critical of the DPI guidance for not stressing a 5 days a week return to school plan in their overall recommendations. A couple more themes that were addressed in the meeting: schools will need to be flexible. The hope is to be doing school in person, but that is subject to change through a hybrid or a blended learning format if health conditions change, and that's an unknown at this time. Another issue of concern was staffing. The concern about whether all of our teachers and staff will want to come back into the buildings if health concerns increase due to overall virus spread. And among some of the problem areas mentioned in the committee, bus drivers, substitute teachers, and other positions that are often filled by older workers was mentioned a couple times as a theme of concern. The committee talked about resources needed, such as more personnel, more cleaning, overall more janitorial staff, the need for more school nurses, bus routes, and bus drivers were all discussed as some of the needed resources. Another issue that the committee emphasized is the issue of broadband. Internet access is still an issue in many areas and households in the state, and not just rural areas. The committee mentioned if in-person instruction can't be provided, then internet access issues and inequities among students will be a renewed concern and brought to the forefront. The committee ended with just looking at the immense challenges ahead of them. Navigating all of this in the next 6 weeks will be extremely difficult because nobody will know how the situation will unfold in the future. And another challenge is the likely impact to state tax collections and what that could mean to overall school funding. And again, that all came out of the Assembly Education Committee on June 25th. Next, former Governor Scott Walker, his veto in the 2017-2019 state budget that changed a 1-year moratorium of the school district energy efficiency revenue limit exemption to a 1,000-year moratorium was upheld recently by the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Essentially, the court said the challenge to the veto was brought too late rather than ruling on the constitutionality of the veto itself. In a separate decision by the Supreme Court on July 10th, the court struck down 3 partial vetoes by Governor Evers in the 2019-21 state budget, including one that eliminated a grant program for school buses. thus replacing it with funding for electric vehicle charging stations and to replace municipal buses. Turning over to the national scene, Democrats in the U.S. Senate proposed a big boost in federal aid for schools in response to the COVID pandemic. Last week, Patty Murray of Washington, who is the ranking Democratic member on the Senate Education Committee, as well as 17 Senate Democratic colleagues, including our own Senator Tammy Baldwin, introduced the Coronavirus Child Care and Education Relief Act. This bill, numbered Senate Bill 4112, is seen as Senate Democrats' opening bid in the debate with their Republican counterparts over providing additional COVID stimulus funding for education. And also in Capitol Hill, it's noted June was relatively quiet, but as July ramps up, the workload is expected to complete more important work as well. Tentatively on the docket is including passing another COVID-19 emergency response bill before the lengthy August recess begins, which is stated to start August 7th. So WASB urges and states that this is an opportunity for school leaders to seek substantial federal funding to help schools safely reopen in the fall, amid huge financial uncertainty caused by declining state tax revenues. Without such federal assistance, the prospect of dramatic cuts to state school aid looms large as the states look to trim their budgets. So that gives us just under a month for tentative federal aid. After August, when the recess kicks in, I don't anticipate a ton of legislation, as campaigns will be, unfortunately, the priority come August in the eyes of our federal legislators. The Wheeler Report recently is publishing a series on K-12 education during this pandemic. WASB and other K-12 groups have been working with the Wheeler Report on a series looking at the issues impacting K-12 education in Wisconsin, from when schools were closed statewide to the health emergency to what lies ahead in the fall. The Wheeler Report is a highly respected report, covers the Wisconsin legislature and state politics, and legislators, staff, policymakers widely respect this report. The first 4 parts, and now recently part 5, have been posted on the Wheeler Report blog as well as the WASB legislative blog. And part 5, the final report, talks about going forward. What will it look like lying ahead in the fall? Also, at the state level, Wisconsin Attorney General Josh Kaul has joined several other state attorneys general in filing a lawsuit in opposition to the interim final rule issued by the U.S. Department of Education. This rule would reroute millions of dollars in coronavirus aid money to K-12 private school students. This rule carries the force of law and took immediate effect per Betsy DeVos's direction, but there is a 30-day comment period, and WASB encourages all school leaders to offer comments about this final interim rule within this window. Next, the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction has released July 1st aid estimates for public school districts. These are estimates of general school aids for the 2020-21 school year, with the planned increases included in the budget when it was passed last year. Again, the full effects to tax collections from this pandemic are still largely unknown, and there is much uncertainty in terms of whether districts will receive what is estimated. If tax collections take a big enough hit to trigger a budget repair bill, these amounts will likely be significantly impacted. Next, the Office of School Safety announced new webinar opportunities just last week. Coming from the Wisconsin School Safety Coordinators Association, the Department of Justice, and the Office of School Safety together announced a culturally responsive school safety webinar series. This series of webinars is designed to provide necessary information when considering how school safety and overall security practices can be made more culturally responsive. This series will look at evidence-based best practices in providing overall safe learning environments for our state. Also out of DPI, at the tail end of June, DPI released newly revised model academic standards for English language arts, personal financial literacy, and physical education. State Superintendent Carolyn Stanford Taylor announced June 30th the adoption of 3 sets of newly revised academic standards, which specify what knowledge and skills students should learn by the end of each grade level or band of grades. WASB has links on the legislative blog for more information, as well as a news release from DPI regarding each individual set of standards and the requirements in that release. Next, also from DPI, this is going back to June 15th, so a little bit, just a couple days after that last report. State Emergency Operations Center and DPI are partnering to distribute cloth masks and thermometers to Wisconsin schools. Each public school district will receive a one-time allocation of masks and thermometers using a formula based upon enrollment. The allocation of masks is intended to provide a supply for students and staff and account for the overall need to replace masks as they are lost and damaged. And shipments began last week from that. The last thing for this month, Governor Evers announced on June 17th, so again a couple of days after that last report in June, he announced $46 million for K-12 schools from the CARES Act for COVID assistance. The funding announced on June 30th comes from $80 million in federal funds provided under the CARES Act that were allocated to Wisconsin and to be distributed under the governor's authority and the governor's discretion. The remaining funding will go to post-secondary institutions. And just looking at the numbers here in terms of Evers' press release, $46 million to K-12 schools and $37 million allocated to higher education partners to assist with the challenges facing from this pandemic. So that takes us, state and national news takes us to August. And we'll see what the federal legislation for recess takes shape.
I just looked up for Sandy's. Note 988 is the number. FCC Commission approved it December of 2019 and gave it an 18-month time frame for it to be enacted. Pending government money. Because that's what they're going to be fighting about for 18 months.
Okay, thank you for the report, Troy. Seems like a busy time. We can move on next to the bills.
I would make a motion that the receipts be noted and the bills be paid as printed.
Second.
We have a motion and a second that the receipts be noted and bills paid as printed. We have roll call, please, Brent.
Mrs. Hack?
Yes.
Mr. Bengel?
Yes.
Mr. Beer?
Yes.
Mrs. Medina?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Cranes?
Yes.
Mrs. Ryan?
Yes.
Thank you, Maureen. Moves us into new business. The first item, possible action on employee appointments, resignations, and retirement requests.
We have a couple of those on a gray sheet. Lori Harmson is going to be taking a special ed position at Grant. Lori's been an aide in the district for a number of years, has a teaching license, but's been an aide and then has taken advantage of that workforce development accelerated special education certification program. So she's finishing that up this coming year. So we're thrilled that it worked out for her to not only take part in that program, but then circle back and take over a teaching job at the district. Anna Wolke, remember we had a person say they were going to take a job and then pull out a couple days later. She was basically 1B in that group that was interviewed, so they're thrilled that she was available and willing. And she drove down the day after I called her to tell her the job was open so she could tour the building, and was excited to be at Rams. And then, do you want me to go into, I can't remember if I go into resignations right away or, okay. Christine Skog signed the contract and then decided a couple days later that she didn't want it. And then Lynette Simonar is moving out of town.
Okay, thank you.
I'd make a motion to approve the professional staff appointment of Lori Harmson and Anna Wolke as presented, effective with the 2021 school year.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve the professional staff appointment of Lori Harmson and Ann Wolke as presented, effective with the 2020-21 school year. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Then I'd make a motion to approve the professional staff resignation requests of Christine Skog and Lynette Simonar, pending receipt of liquidated damages.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the professional staff resignation request of Christine Skog and Lynette Simonar pending receipt of liquidated damages. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we move on to item B, discussion and possible action to amend the 2019-20 district budget.
We can turn it right over to Dan.
Go.
There's a yellow sheet there with the items that Dan will be discussing.
There's 3 pages to the changes. Most significant changes are on the first page. I've attached an explanation of what changes are for the more significant dollar amounts. And the other changes were in the capital projects fund, Fund 49, and the employee benefit trust fund, Fund 73. And that the changes in the Fund 73 was a result of a new actuarial firm doing our study, and there was a significant increase in the amount, which also impacted Fund 10.
Can I get a description on the salaries and benefits, how that dropped 1.5 million?
Right. That's salaries. Most of the significant changes were the salaries, and then the benefits that tie into that, the retirement and the Social Security. And it's across all of the 6th grade through 9th grade teaching staff.
Okay.
Any other questions for Dan?
I would vote to approve to amend it to the 1920 district budget as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve to amend the 2019-20 district budget as presented. We have roll call, please, ma'am.
Mr. Beer?
Yes.
Mrs. Hett?
Yes.
Mrs. Medina?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Bendel?
Yes.
Mrs. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Crane?
Yes. Okay, next item, discussion and possible action to approve the purchase of a telephone system upgrade. I guess that's why Phil's sitting back.
That's why I'm here. You should have received a pretty big sheets of paper. Maureen, you give me a microphone and have. We'll kind of try to go through this. We've got a gray document as well in the board packet information. Does anybody get a chance to read that? Anybody have any questions on that? I apologize for not having the numbers sooner. We're just waiting on the final numbers. I actually didn't get some of that final stuff until almost 2 o'clock this afternoon, so this is kind of hot off the press. I'll just go through, we have 3 proposals we're looking at. A proposal to keep kind of our current system, Mitel from Marco, a new phone system, Forta Voice from Heartland Business Systems, and then Solaris, also our local telco, put in a solution to host the system within their infrastructure. Kind of both those pros and cons out. Kind of the dollar amounts broken down here. I'll try to go through this. Hopefully you can follow it. I put some line items on the left there. So line items 1 through 4, or actually 1 through 6, are what the Marco proposal is for Mitel. That's just the cost to move to that virtual system. Would be about $61,345. And if you continue down that Marco line item all the way towards the bottom, basically line item 44, the average cost of the phone for my telephone, we didn't actually get proposals on the actual phones, but we know how much they cost because we are currently buying some of them. The average cost of the phone is about $300. Some are a little bit more, some are close to $500, and some are about $250 or $200. So when you average that out, it's about $300 a phone. So we figured if we upgraded those phones, that cost would be about $187,500 based on the number of 625 phones we would need to replace. So that whole solution cost is about $248,845. That would be just to get us going here, and get the phone system replaced. Heartland proposal for Forta Voice, you can kind of see that's line items 15 through 21. And line items 19 through 21, I kind of highlighted because there's this Informacast subscription that they're proposing, and part of that is to integrate the overhead paging into their system. But additionally, what Informacast does, it's a mass notification system. So not only would we get our overhead paging, but we would also integrate in potential weather alerts, potential active shooter alerts, paging to the individual phones. That would actually integrate it into the potentially down the road into projectors, computer monitors, anything that's networked. So, for example, Ron is here. If there was a situation at Lincoln, he could hit a button from his cell phone and send out alerts to every screen in the building, and then be able to page right from his phone, his cell phone. So that is a solution that they are proposed that neither of the other two solutions would have when you look at it. So if we wanted to be an apples to apples comparison at the end here, I'll kind of show you, we would have to add that on to both of those solutions and make them apples to apples. So that whole thing, it's about $59,144. The cost of the phones, you can kind of see down there, line items 35 through 38. Significant difference in cost of phones. Fortinet is very competitive when it comes to equipment. That's the same with their firewall as well, which we currently own. Their firewall solution, they're very competitive there. You can see the difference in cost is significant compared to what it is for the Mitel phones. We actually have those phones here. We've tested them. We physically had our hands on them. They're a pretty decent phone. One other piece with this is the soft client, which is line item 18. What a soft client is, I kind of explained that. It's the ability to have a client on your cell phone, and you could make a phone call from your cell phone. It would look like you're calling from your district extension. So that would work really handy if we would have to go back into a teaching at home situation or learning at home scenario where a teaching staff would be able to put a client on their phone and call from their cell phone like they're calling from school. So, as long as they have a Wi-Fi connection or a cellular connection, it would just use that data over that. So
Just want to enhance your numbers. The cost per phone for the Fortinet average is $145, and for the Solaris solution is $240.
Oh, okay. So that's another key, a big differentiator for the FortiVoice system is that solution. Mitel has that also, but we'd have to add an additional licensing fee to get that as well, and that's not included in here. Questions so far? I'll keep on moving to Solaris. Solaris's model is a little different. They actually they went back to the board, and they weren't very competitive, but they've gotten a little more competitive. And the difference probably between their system versus all the others, it's a monthly fee to host the system there. So instead of making it a capital purchase, it would be kind of an operating expense, which would be a little different. We're hoping to pay for this out of our capital funds fund. And this will not fall in line with that. Doesn't mean we wouldn't want to look at it, but we just have to look at it a little differently and how we do it. So, but they have an annual cost of about $38,000, and then their phones are significantly more expensive. And line item 39, I wanted to point out, that phone may or may not work. We have not had a chance to physically get our hands on it. We need basically 2 network jacks on the back side, because a lot of our phones, the network jack comes out of the wall, goes in the phone to make the phone call, and then it goes over to the computer to provide internet access. And if it doesn't have that second jack at the speed we want it, we'd have to potentially upgrade to the next level of phone, which is about another $50 per phone. So that would take that up, 500 phones, it's a significant increase of cost there. So I also want to point out that at the very bottom there in the yellow, the solution totals, we currently have a Mitel license that we have about 20 to 3 months remaining on, probably 22 months by the time we actually get this in that we've already paid for. So we'd be losing some of that. Those dollars, we've already paid for it, it's already been expended, but I just wanted to make a note of there that we'd be losing some of that dollars, and that's one of the reasons why we want to move away from Mitel, because if you look at the 5-year total cost of ownership, which is on the next page, it's very significant. I've got it kind of broken down over 5 years what these solutions would all cost. When you look at the Marco proposal, with the cost of the Mitel in year 3, we'd have to renew Mitel. I'm guessing it's going to be about $45,000, but it could be higher. That's what we renewed it last time. So it usually goes up 3 to 5% each year, so it might even be closer to $50,000. And then our PRI cost, what it costs us to have the phone system from Solaris. I just wanted to put that in there because there is that cost. And then if we added on the InformaCast to make it apples to apples, that would be an additional $40,000 over the 5 years, so it brings that solution total to $426. You can see the Heartland proposal on the FortiVoice is $267, $332.42, and then the Solaris, it actually takes off the $92,000 because we wouldn't have to pay for that anymore because that's part of the solution. But it's still, in the end, once we'd add InformaCast on, if we wanted to be apples to apples, it would be a little bit, it would be about $30,000 and some change, well, almost $37,000 more. So,
I have a question.
yes.
Just the line 34, the number phones, why are there different numbers for?
Good question. The difference in numbers, because we have some currently, we've already got about 40 upgraded phones already from Mitel that we've already upgraded. We wouldn't need to upgrade those. And we potentially, if we switch to FortiVoice, we would potentially resell those phones to someone else. So we wouldn't have to replace every single phone.
That one looks upgraded.
That one is not an upgraded one. That is a one that would be needed to be upgraded. So, my recommendation is that we're hoping to move to the FortiVoice rather than the Solaris. The biggest issue is that with Solaris, I think would be an okay solution, but we don't have control over it. They have control over it. It wouldn't be internal. We'd have to call their support. In some cases, that's nice. In some cases, that's not so nice. And then we're kind of, their mercy or whatever it may be. And then we'd also have potential costs to add extensions. So if we wanted to add an extension, they would need to do that, and there would be a cost associated with it. Whereas with the FortiVoice solution, we can add up to 2,000 extensions without a problem. So we wouldn't have any issues there. And those can be done fairly easily. So that's kind of what we're recommending. I think there's a potential motion. Questions? Do we have any questions that make sense?
That I would move to recommend approval of the purchase of a district telephone system upgrade from Heartland Business Systems as presented at a cost not to exceed $165,000 to be funded through Fund 46.
Second.
We have a motion, a second, to approve the purchase of a district telephone system upgrade from Heartland Business Systems as presented at a cost not to exceed $165,000 to be funded through Fund 46. We have roll call, please.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Krantz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hutt?
Yes.
Mrs. Royal?
Yes.
Mrs. Medina?
Yes.
Mr. Bumble?
Yes.
Mr. Beer?
Yes.
Thank you. Next item, update and discussion on the progress of reopening committee.
Yeah, so you were provided with the same letter and supplementary information that went to parents. So I hope you had the opportunity to read that. As it stands right now, I think if we were to call it Plan A would be that we're 5-day a week in-person instruction for kids pre-K through 12. But I would also say that based on circumstances, because in our elementary buildings you have much greater degree of latitude to cohort by keeping at least classrooms together to a degree and less passing time and very much fewer students in our elementary buildings than at our middle and high school. I do allude to the fact that there's a possibility based on circumstance here locally, consultation with our medical advisors in addition to public health, that Rams and Lincoln may be looking at the cohorting A-B schedules as we open the school year, but that is their plan B. So in a general sense, if we were starting school next week, I think basically the thought process is, and the information that I've seen and heard thus far, is that we could do so pre-K through 12, 5-day a week in-person instruction, but implementing preventative precautionary measures. One of the hot topics, of course, is face coverings and their relative effectiveness. The medical advisors, as well as public health, as well as some individuals on the federal level, are advising that mask wearing is important. Face covering wearing is important if you're unable to socially distance, or physically distance, I think is the proper terminology. I think it's relevant to point out as well to viewers perhaps that are watching, I would argue that's one of the reasons I'm not currently wearing a mask in a group situation, is because we are able to physically distance here in this room. That's how we set it up in that capacity. But again, it's not about my personal decision-making or attitudes, it's about what public health and our medical advisors are indicating. One of the circles that you have to square is the fact that in some of the conversation that's transpired so far is that it's a virus, and viruses spread when groups of people come together. And I think there's some data and research that our medical advisors have shared with us. I'm sure you folks have seen some and heard some things that COVID-19 seems to spread a little less likely than it does in adults. In addition, the sickness is not quite as significant as it can be in adults, particularly when taking precautionary measures. Now, I will be very honest and clear with you and say, I don't believe anybody's under the illusion that they're saying it just doesn't happen. Like, kids can get together and there's no problem. No one has said those words. But what has been said is that if you're unable to physically distance, you should be wearing a face covering, which is what we're going to highly encourage our students to do. We did talk about the fact that there is, we have authority to, as an organization, say you must wear a mask to the student body. However, legal guidance has indicated to, I'm not aware of any school district in Wisconsin currently taking that tact, although it's possible in certain counties because they're following a county order. We do not have a county order to that extent, and we also don't have cases that are present in other counties. But legally speaking, we as an organization could require masks of all of our students. The issue with that is that if that were the case, you would also have to provide for medical exemption, religious exemption, and possibly exemption due to personal conviction. The other thing that you do, and again, this is my opinion, because we haven't instituted mandatory masks for all students, but I believe what you would do is set the stage for a battle to erupt on the battleground being our school buildings, where kids are caught in the middle. Because some parents feel kids don't need to wear, no one needs to wear a mask, and some parents feel that everyone should wear a mask. And frankly, because of lacking leadership on a lot of levels, and I'm not going to name names, but I think you guys can all determine what I'm talking about, both state and federally, there isn't significant guidance to follow through on this and ensure that organizations like schools are not caught in the middle, being a battleground where kids are the pawn, unfortunately, in between. And I adamantly refuse to put our students in that position. I don't think that we should be a battleground for what is now considered some kind of political statement. A virus is not political, in my opinion. A virus is a virus. It's epidemiological, it's medical, but it is not political. It infects Republicans, Democrats, and independents alike. And I think the baseline rationale around face coverings is not that they're 100% effective, but the idea that when you have groups of people together for prolonged periods of time, more than just in transients, right? Because they've always talked about, like, shopping at Walmart, frankly, or going to the grocery store, you don't really have a significant risk because you're passing people. I mean, you can be in closer contact, but you're not on top of each other for a while. But to me, if you put a covering in front of your face, it's going to reduce the chance of particulate matter, aerosols, and so forth, coming from talking, coughing, sneezing, breathing, right? And that basic premise is what's supported by our current medical advisors as well as public health, in addition to the things that we all know and love with the flu season and just basically, general public health practice, which is staying home when you're sick, washing your hands with regular frequency or using hand sanitizer, using physical distance when reasonable and appropriate and able, and those basic things, and implementing those things from other countries, aside from the U.S., have illustrated positive trends with regard to what the COVID curve, looks like. But we can't be blind to the fact that Lincoln High School and Rams house 1,500 and 1,100 kids respectively. We can't be blind to the fact that modified schedules and so forth will still cause disruption to school services and disruption to parents and community services. And cohorting whether or not that, cutting your kids in half would clearly decrease the potential spread, I would argue, but does it necessarily solve the problems? I don't know the answer to that question. And then, of course, all of our buildings have, and elementary will have that capacity to go to a cohort-based schedule, but again, the current advice is that it's likely not necessary because, once again, classes are, for the most part, fairly small, and buildings are isolated in and of themselves. And grade levels in classes can be much easier in an elementary school. But The idea too that any of our schools at any time during the course of the year can transition, between these three options: in-person, face-to-face with safety precautions, a cohort schedule with safety precautions, and A, B. In fact, what Ron and Tracy and their staff had developed was a Monday, Tuesday would be cohort A, Thursday, Friday would be cohort B. And that basically those would be your in-person school days, and the other days would be you're kind of working from home. You have 5 days of work that you get in those 2 days, and you're supported during the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday if you're cohort A, Monday, Tuesday, and vice versa for Thursday, Friday. But that also creates issues with things like sports and clubs and all the other things that we've got going. Most kids 6-12, I would argue, most can stay home without supervision, so I think it's less of that significant community-wide impact and parents going to work or unable to go to work because kids are home if you did the cohorting with middle and high school. But we would have then the ability, and I think if we're being rational, we're going to approach this on an every 2 week or every month basis, meaning we're not going to be jumping back and forth and changing, but we're being evaluative as things progress, right? So we could start school in September with things in place and people are doing the things that they said they're going to do, and lo and behold, things are working out pretty well. And September's just fine, and come October, the wheels are falling off and we gotta change plans. So then we'll be able to change then, or maybe November or December. We're also currently putting together some information. I just sent out an email today. I think it'll be countywide because that makes the most sense, but developing, involving our school nurses in the development of kind of protocols and practices around sickness in the COVID-19 pandemic era and what that means for our school nurses and where we can sequester kids. Because keep in mind, although common colds and flu are not common right now, they're going to be October, November, December. And if you have every kid with a cough, a sneeze, or a sniffle that is suspected of COVID-19, you're going to have testing requirements and circumstances of quarantine balloon. And I think if you're being rational about that, it's not all going to be COVID-19. I mean, there's going to be some common colds, there's going to be some flu, there's going to be some allergies, there's going to be a mix of things. So identifying what that looks like and developing those protocols in conjunction with school districts, public health, our school nurses, and our medical advisors to help problem solve and get some protocols and parameters around that. So that's also in process. We are looking at kind of, and if you read my letter, you saw this, but engaging in kind of a public information campaign around face coverings and other practices that people can do, because I can't emphasize enough, ultimately, whichever direction this goes, it's a community effort, right? And if we're able to hold school for the longest period of time possible in person, then I would argue that our community has to come together around some very basic topics, and those topics for the most part have been shared with you. It's about changing practices. There's some underlying concerns too about parents sending their kids to school when they're sick, and some of that commentary, but frankly, there's really not any ability to mandate or preemptively identify a sick kid before they get on a bus or come to a school building until they come to school. And very clearly our staff will be acutely aware of students that are exhibiting signs of sickness and then what we do with that kid when they come. There's been a very brief and it's a handful of question survey, but really it's asking one question of community members and parents, which says, if we have 5-day-a-week in-person school, I'm willing to do the following, which is basically stay home if I'm sick, use physical distancing, and they're asked to respond yes or no to each of these. As it stands right now, as of, the last time I looked, it was probably around lunchtime, but there's 136 responses so far, and most of them have nearly 100% agreement of I'm able to do that. Use physical distancing is slightly lower than 100%. And the other piece that is slightly lower than 100% is the use of face coverings. We do have some adamant folks in the community that are not interested in using face coverings, which they have that ability to do so. But that's at like 85.3 or 85.5% who responded yes to that, out of the 136. The threshold that our medical advisors are looking for is 80% uptake. They think that's a sweet spot. And I said, so if we're at 70% or 60% or 72.3%, does that mean your advice would be not to not start school? And their response was no, not necessarily. So we're seeing how things pan out. Also, what's transpiring is that Dr. Amy Falk, in conjunction with some district personnel, is advocating, and I have a meeting Wednesday morning with the Legacy Foundation, advocating for a grant for pretty cool masks actually for all kids, K-12. 5-pack for elementary kids and a 3-pack for middle and high, masks for all kids in Southwood County. Basically every school district and us included. And that conversation with the Legacy Foundation Board is slated to begin on Wednesday morning at 8:30. She and I are gonna go and chit chat with the Legacy Foundation Board. So if that goes somewhere, we'll have that. They're talking too about incentives and so forth to, not only education, but incentives to get kids to jump on board and participate. Tied into that to a degree, summer school. So we do have summer school operating. We approach summer school in a little looser approach simply because numbers are lower, number one, and number two, there's a limited amount of kids involved in the first place. Numbers in courses, right? They're smaller classes. But I do know that my kids participate in the Lincoln High School weight room, strength and conditioning. And there's, kids are highly encouraged to wear a mask from what I'm being told. Most kids are. That's an accurate statement, Nick. Have you been around there?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the elementary level, it's kind of grab bag. There's some that do, there's some that don't. Staff are encouraging it. But one of the things, like I said before, is that it's not a battleground. And one of the things that we talk about when we talk about implementing safe practices, one of the comments that I hear quite frequently is, well, you can't keep kids away from one another. And the response to that is, no, we can't. And that's not the expectation. We can't be in a position where we're saying, no, you stay. People have to, we got to kind of let this organically develop. And that's where the assistance of parents and community at large is going to make the most sense. But are we going to approach this where, elementary kids have to, cannot come into contact with one another at all? No, I don't know that anybody has stated that. I mean, it's just not rational for first graders to not come into contact with one another. So the goal then becomes keeping them with their cohort or keeping them in the same spot for the most part so that their contact with the number of people is limited to a certain number. And then relatively simple things like assigned seats, right? So you're probably in a lot of circumstances at the secondary level, you may have teachers that never assign seats and now everybody's going to. And the reason you're going to do that is because I know that if Larry's sitting there and Maureen's on his left and Katie's on his right and no one's behind him and no one's in front of him, so boom, there I know already who public health needs to talk to if Larry's a positive COVID-19 case. So there's some fairly, easy examples of things that you can do. Well, we're working through transportation. That was, we had initially conceived of that as a survey that parents would fill out. Based on our first survey that we did, which I encapsulated in that letter too, just some brief commentary around that. We had 500 and some responses, 536 or 500? 502? Oh, 532, thank you. 532 responses, which clearly if you do the math is a small fraction of the district population, but with respect to this transportation piece, we thought, well, okay, if we have 10% of people eligible for transportation respond, we're gonna have a problem, so we gotta figure this out. So we shifted gears a little bit. Instead of doing a survey for transportation, what we're doing is we're doing an email, and then we're also doing phone calls. So there'll be personal contact with virtually every family that is eligible for transportation district-wide. And that means if you're 2+ miles out from whatever school building your kids attend, you're gonna get an email and then likely, potentially a follow-up phone call if you don't respond. Because identifying how many kids we're gonna have on how many routes and so forth is another aspect that's at play so that we can minimize and control that to a degree. And then the other piece in moving forward, and this has been kind of seeded in throughout, but I cannot overemphasize the idea that there will absolutely be options for families that cannot or will not send their kid to school. And what we're doing in the interim now is kind of developing a suite of options for elementary kids, middle school kids, and high school kids. And sometime, and one of the weight has to do with us developing plans, but it also has to do with the fact that what I'm going to respond now as a parent might change in 4 weeks or 5 weeks. So asking now mid-July doesn't make a ton of sense. but asking sometime early August is what we're shooting for, and it doesn't have to be a guarantee. So if parents make these choices, they're not locked in, like you have to do this for the year. They have the ability to kind of shift back and forth based on circumstance too. But there'll be a point where people are asked to just fill out a very quick survey that simply says, I will not, or my son or daughter will not participate in in-person school, and they'll put down their name, their contact information, and the building or buildings that their child attends. Those buildings will then reach out to the family and say, here's your options, family, and they include virtual, they include paper and pencil, and with, that's at elementary, and also some other options that are kind of like being a hybrid between being in person and home, but with logging in and accessing district resources. And at Rams and Lincoln, we're probably, because of the nature of the number of classes, you know, a kid travels into 7 different teachers' classrooms and they change. There's not any, you know, you can have a couple of kids with very similar or identical schedules, but, you know, you have a much different mix of circumstance. So what likely will happen at Rams or Lincoln for families will be, you know, you've got a virtual option, and it'll be almost entirely virtual where they'll get dropped into something like Acellus if they're planning on not being on site at all for at least a trimester at a time. That's kind of the thought process there. So the suite of options somewhat limits at the secondary level, and the reason behind that is you're limited with what we can do with students in the secondary level. And Central Oaks Academy is also a potential resource for folks, and that's part of the suite of options that parents have access to. We referred to Central Oaks as a virtual program. It can be a virtual program. It doesn't have to be a virtual program. That's what's interesting about Central Oaks. So, you know, the school works in conjunction with parents, so it's a very similar kind of approach to what we're talking about doing district-wide. And parents in Central Oaks kind of develop and identify, oh, here's what appropriate curriculum looks like, and we purchase that on their behalf, and then parents typically help the kids through that. So it can be kind of a modified homeschool. It can also be 100% virtual and anywhere in between. So we're basically creating that suite of options before we communicate to parents that, hey, fill this out, and then reach back out to them and get them seated into their circumstance. All while planning on all of these pieces continue and seeking feedback from, again, the medical community and public health. As it stands right now, everything that I'm telling you is not different than any other school district that they're doing. I mean, everybody for the most part in Wisconsin has the 3 plans. We have in-person, we have hybrid or cohort, and then we have 100% virtual. That's, I mean, those are basically the 3 generalized approaches. As we move closer to August, I'm willing to bet you're going to hear more about we're doing in-person or we're doing hybrid or we're doing virtual here locally. As it stands right now, Point is the only school district that I'm aware of that said, here's what we think we're going to do, and they were going to go 7-12 this cohort schedule, pre-K6 or 4K6 in person. But in their most recent communication, they did emphasize on a couple of occasions we're eyeing 5-day-a-week in-person instruction. So it sounded initially like that was a done deal for them, but I don't know that that's the case. And frankly, I don't think it was a done deal. I think it was, this is what we're thinking.
It's a done deal right now.
Right. The final piece that I'll say about the reopening, and then open it for any questions, because I'll probably forget some things and then circle back, but is that I would argue we need to be prepared to do just about anything, and I would also argue that it doesn't make sense to make your final call till probably the end of the first week, if not the second week of August, where you say, hey parents, this is what we're going to do. And then you say, guarantee. And then you say, but it could change. And that's the biggest issue. There is resounding sentiment. 85+% of the 500, and I shared that with you in that letter, of the 532 responses that indicated, you know, having kids back in school is something we want to see happen. But I would also argue it's tempered with the idea that we don't want you just to willy-nilly and, you know, do this in a relaxed fashion, that there should be some things that you take into account. There should be some methods you employ to keep kids safe and see where it goes. The irony of the whole thing, and then I'll finally shut up and let there be questions if there are, is that there's many things that are kid-based that are still going on. You know, soccer is starting up again with some measures in place. There's a tryout tonight, in fact, that my son's doing I mentioned to John Bembo, just chit-chatting before the meeting, my daughter's at a softball game this evening, and she's gonna be a junior. There's kids, of course, playing softball. And I think we're seeing these things in the community, which brings me back to my initial point. And that is, we're only going to do this as a community. So if we decide that we want kids in school and playing the game, as it were, we have to come together as a community and do these very rudimentary things and try our best to struggle through and make it happen. And then there is the sidelight of the undue and in some cases unnecessary but justifiable stress that it causes our families, our kids, and our staff. And to that, I'll hearken back to my initial comment, which has to do with local, state, and federal guidance and leadership on this topic has been completely lacking in this country, in my personal opinion. Now I'm done.
Your communications that I've looked at are excellent communications. They're honest, they tell you the whole situation, give people the information they need, but you say that it could change. It's great leadership. What is the situation locally if we have a surge of cases and need to test, track, and do that?
Yeah, and the testing piece is what has our medical community and public health a bit concerned. Particularly when you talk about what it looks like come October, November, December, when you're heading into cold and flu season. And the benchmark is, if you're showing these signs and symptoms, they recommend you getting a test. I don't know the solid answer to that question yet. We're working through that in conjunction with our public health nurses. I do know, because there's some of those questions out there as well, and I made an attempt at answering them, and frankly, my letter was quite lengthy to begin with, as you guys know. But if you go through all of the protocols and responses with regard to public health, a positive coronavirus case doesn't really mean that much is going to happen with regard to the school or shutting buildings down immediately. What it means is that it'll be just like if there's a positive case now, that contact tracing is initiated. And so they will ask the school questions like, who does this kid sit by? Who does this kid have close contact with? They'll ask the kid and the family too, right? Or the staff member, or the adult. And then they go out, an echelon or two, and then from there make the determinations and provide advice as they work through that. So it doesn't equate to a school shutdown because there's a certain number of coronavirus cases in kids or even adults. The rub, I would argue, and what I tried to lay out in that letter is a foreseeable issue, maybe exposure by too many staff who would be required to quarantine or, God forbid, would need medical treatment. And then we would be unable to fill their positions with substitutes or other, competent human beings and may have to close a building as a result of that. In our last meeting, Sue Kumperman, our Director of Public Health, was on the line with the reopening committee, and she said, I don't really foresee the likelihood of shutting down an entire building. Those were the words that came out of her mouth. And I would say that I don't see that either if it's just kids, right? And I don't mean just kids like they're okay to get it. I just mean if kids are sick, you can still run a school, right? Because the kids that are sick aren't there. And there's a threshold by which you can't do that. But the primary concern becomes, can we staff it and still safely run school? And that testing piece, and steering back, we don't have, proportionally speaking, a significant number of cases in Wood County. They're on the rise. They're on the rise in pretty much every county in Wisconsin, as far as I know. But we don't have this crazy number, right? And I'm not saying that it's okay to wait until we have a crazy number, nor is public health. But that conversation is more about more circumstances than just the sheer number of cases as well. It's active cases. It's probably the nature of the human beings that have those cases. Are we seeing them in younger people? Are we is it isolated to a certain venue or an occurrence? Is it, those are the questions that public health asks, and then we'll have those conversations and they'll guide and recommend us through that kind of process. Because that's another piece, that question that's out there that you folks may have too that I've heard. Well, what number? What's the number then that you're going to shut her down? And I don't think public health would even say a number. They wouldn't say, if you get to this number of cases, you do this, that, or the other thing. The reason being is because there's so much nuance involved in what that means. If there's an outbreak in in a retirement community, as an example, or a convalescence home, right? And it's isolated to that home, you could have a high number of cases and it could really be inconsequential to the community at large. So there's those pieces, when I say that, it's consequential to folks that have it, don't get me wrong, but if they're sequestered, there's not a lot of contact with outside individuals, you know what I mean? So these are the pieces that are the unknown, and I would argue they're probably unknown everywhere as it stands right now. We're going to do our best to kind of lock that down and develop what this approach looks like. But those are the hardest questions to answer currently.
Other questions? I'm sure we'll hear more in our August.
Yes, you'll probably hear some things every month. Every month, if not before, yeah. And you'll continue to receive email updates. Our next reopening committee meeting is Tuesday, the 21st, sticks in my mind, 1 p.m. Following that, there'll be another district update. This survey around, I don't want my kid to come to school in person, will go out. So all of these things are going to happen here in the last week or so of August, last week of July, first or so week of August, and then we'll see where the chips fall. Like I said, if I were, if somebody pressed me and said, what do you think is going to, what can you give me? Well, I shouldn't even say guarantee, but I would like 90% based on our conversations that elementary, 4K through 5, will be in person 5 days a week. My question mark is with Rams and Lincoln and the number of students they serve and whether or not, right now, I think they could go 5 days a week in person if we have a good uptake on the preventative measures. I'm hearing that we might see crazy numbers by the end of July, maybe we don't, I don't know. So, you know what I mean? That's kind of that's the wishy-washy nonsense of this decision-making that I'm not particularly keen on, but I don't think you can, preemptive decisions in this phase just don't make any sense. And then lastly, I do know that there's a number of staff questions out there. I do know that there's staff that feel that their opinions and voices have not been heard. I think that those conversations best happen at the building level. I do know as well that when the recommendation from our medical community and public health is adults should be wearing masks and practicing these things, I'm not surveying staff on that topic. That doesn't make sense to me. The reason it doesn't make sense to me is because I don't want to personally be asked a question that I really don't have any influence over what the answer is, right? So let's have a board meeting, but I'm going to tell you all how to vote, and if you don't vote that way, you see, it makes no sense. There's opportunities for feedback, but there's certain obligations as an employer that, although I agree with staff feedback, even if they came back 80% no, we shouldn't be required to, and 20% yes, the response is going to be, you're going to be, because our medical advisors and public health is recommending it. And I don't want this air of we're going to ask questions and do the opposite of what people want. Now, do I think that's going to happen? No. I would imagine most of our staff members are supportive of doing these things, but not all. And I respect that, but frankly, as an employer, we have the ability to make these determinations a little easier than we do for the general public at large. And to me, it's the right move to make based on, again, what our advisors are telling us.
Well, my employer instituted, it's coming up on 3 months. We've been getting temperature scanned every time we come in, and mandatory mask wearing anytime we're within 6 foot of another individual. And we didn't have an option. We were told this is the new way, and it's probably going to be through the end of the year. If we don't like it, I guess we can look for another job. So it's the right thing to do. We just got to get used to it.
Right. I'll just quickly add that, of course, now it fell out of my head. Oh, so what's occurring between now and the next reopening committee and then following that as well is individual buildings are not only developing the suite of options that we can provide to parents for kids that need off-site instruction, but also kind of start to articulate so that parents get an idea, okay, what does it look like if my kids go to Washington Elementary? What's my day gonna look like? Here's where you're gonna go when you come. Don't all stand in the entryway like you normally. So some of these, in the next communication, there'll be broad kind of district expectations around kids will likely have seating charts. Adult visitors to school will be limited or not allowed. Just some broad district-wide things. And then I'm hoping that we can have our buildings listed with a click, and then you go and look, and then they can see, here's what recess is going to look like. Here's what my kid's classroom is probably going to look like. And when I say this, I don't mean like they're going to see videos and pictures necessarily, but kind of a verbal description so that families can kind of prepare. Because I think in addition to the conversations around planning, what we're hearing is kind of wild swings in, it's just totally normal versus it's gonna be like a concentration camp, right? Around these rules and guidelines and kids getting hammered over these things. And ultimately, the sweet spot, in my opinion, is somewhere in the middle, right? It's gonna be different. How drastically different it is, I think, depends upon the size of the class and the age of the kid and what their personal experiences are. But it's not going to be terrifying. It's not going to be hard on kids. We're going to do our best to make it be a reasonable and decent experience for our kids. Our people are in the kid business. I just don't see that militant sort of approach is going to be employed. I think it's going to be friendly reminders. It's going to be some changing of behaviors, but we also are rational and pragmatic and know we're dealing with kids. And kids do kid stuff. But that doesn't mean that they're going to get in trouble. It means you might have a conversation and you move on. So, throw that out there for you as well.
All right. Any other questions? Now we can move on to item E, discussion and possible action on future levy override and bond issue referendum questions.
And because you like my voice so much,
We want the cliff note for you.
it's my turn again. And so Mary did a very nice job of reading through the minutes of the Ed Services Committee meeting, and I think described in general what the process is. For the benefit of the folks listening at home or via the internet, we talked about let's start at the beginning, which is typically where you want to start conversations. Our conversation at Ed Services Committee began with a review of the 06 levy override referendum that the district had access to for a number of years. And it goes very well with the point of, I think, reasonable expenditures as well as very good business sense and acumen with regard to what the district did with the dollars, both short-term and long-term, when some of the expenditures out of what are considered those referendum dollars were made as recently as 2020. And in fact, they are now depleted for the most part. I think there's a little bit of money maybe in Phil's technology budget, but not a ton. Not a ton. 30,000 bucks, something like that?
About 100,000 right now,
Okay.
but it'll be gone this year.
Well, we just spent 165, so anyway, on the phone system. But the point being is that since 06, that's, 14-year period, that those dollars were accessed and spent for curriculum and technology. And it's time in this organization, in my opinion, and the timing is right financially. Financially for the organization, the timing is appropriate. The timing is not appropriate in the light of the pandemic and the Verso closing and these other things that are societal issues and problems. And I think that it pays to pay some deference to that. It pays to be cognizant of that. But the point is that we are in a financial circumstance where access to additional dollars via levy override is almost a guarantee need. When I say that, to continue to purchase curriculum materials and upgrade and replace technology, one of the things that pops into my mind immediately is something like the smartboard. And I guarantee you a lot of smartboards were purchased with the 06 referendum dollars over time. They were in many districts. It's very soon that they are obsolete. And that doesn't mean we're going to just, replace, do nothing but replace smartboards. It means we have to employ different approaches to technology in classrooms, and it's 2020. Vastly different than 2006 or 1986. So that's one of those things that pops into my mind where people think, well, geez, you spent these dollars, well, what's the problem? And when I say they don't function any longer, they're not supported. You can broadcast stuff on it, but the software isn't updated. And anybody that has a home computer realizes that after a certain number of years, the operating system has to be updated, and certain times you can't. Or your cell phone, right? I can't use my phone anymore because it's 8 years old and it won't take the new updates, and then it becomes obsolete. So we have that going on. The ongoing curriculum expenditures, we are not on an aggressive curriculum replacement timeline. I think we're at 6 years or 7 years in some cases. 7 or 8 years. My apologies. And I think it goes without saying that if you're keeping up with the times and purchasing curriculum that are relevant to school at the time, you're not talking about curriculum from 2010 when it's 2020. or even older than that. So I would argue the rationale for those dollars is going to be encapsulated in basically those two same buckets once again. And I would say financially speaking, once again, it is a positive time financially for the organization to do it, and that would be because of its impact or lack thereof to taxpayers. And one of the pieces that was in your packet, and I would point to, was attachment G in business services, in the ed services agenda. And if there's anybody that wants to see a copy of that, that doesn't have it, let me know and I'll shoot you an email. But we could do a levy override for $2 million and not have the mill rate increase just slightly from where it is right now. 9.1 currently in the moving into the 2021 school year, which would be the year we're in currently, because it is July. Moves only slightly with a $2 million, if approved, $2 million levy override to 9.25. That tax change on a $100,000 property is $15 a year. $15 a year, not a month. So you can see there's very little tax impact as compared to today if a $2 million levy override was passed. We also had scenarios shared with the board for $1 million and 1.5. For $1 million and 1.5, that does decrease the local tax burden to a small degree. $1 million is $25 less per year on a $100,000 property, and 1.5 is $5 less per year on a $100,000 property. So one could argue that a $2 million levy override approved this spring would be virtually no change based on available information right now. Virtually. We also went into a diatribe, and then I'll be done, I promise, around it may be advantageous as well, excuse me, to look at a bond issue question. The bond issue question is different and separate from the levy override. They would be two separate questions. I would argue the levy override is the question we really want to see pass if in fact it gets put to voters, because those are dollars that we spend on an annual basis. They are not tied up in a bond or in a payment scenario as a bond issue would be. Bond issues are typically for building and construction or renovation, and in this case the information that was provided was alluded to in the minutes was renovations to all of our facilities that house students insofar as they would receive upgrades to their entrances, making them secured. They are secured now, but not to the degree that they need to be, which directs any visitors from the school immediately to the school office. That's the only place they have access to before they're granted access to the remainder of the building. That is not the case at most of our facilities. Some of our facilities, the cost of doing that is a few $100,000, and some of it's $50,000. And it depends on the school and the layout of the school and the location of the office and so forth and so on. And so some of that information was shared. Additionally, we had discussed the fact that it is about time for renovations, particularly at Lincoln High School, in our science classrooms. Our science classrooms are circa 1979. That's when the current Lincoln High School was built. As a former science teacher myself, there is nothing that's the same in a science lab from 1979 to 2020. And when I say that, I mean legitimately nothing. There's not people doing science legitimately in this day and age with materials and equipment from 1979. And with that said, it's upon looking at it, you're not going to walk into some kind of alternative universe, but on the same end, there's going to be some distinct differences from 79 to 2020. And so part of the approach would be to renovate that second floor of Lincoln High School with an eye specifically on the science classrooms. It would remove the media center, providing more room to our science classrooms, which are undersized for the students that are in that building. Not because there's freshmen there. I have to emphasize that. Not because there's freshmen there. Those science classrooms have been undersized since Lincoln was 1,500 kids. They're designed for around 22 students or 24?
24.
Up to 24 students. And although we have classes of 24 students, we also have classes of 26, 27, 28, 29, and sometimes 30, particularly in general science courses where every kid at Lincoln High School is going to take, course XYZ. We also have some rooms that one is an old storage room or a prep room that is now a classroom, and these other pieces. So making that modification on the second floor of Lincoln would take over the media center. There'd be some modifications in a general sense to other classrooms up there, not to a huge degree, but creating also some shared spaces that would be enjoyed by all students, not just the science classroom students. And then relocating the media center on the front of the building in conjunction with this renovated entrance for security, and some modification in the offices that would route the folks with the secured entrance in the office-wise. Some of those blueprints those mock-ups were in that packet for you. And it would also, an excellent, let's call it a side benefit, is make the media center contiguous with the current commons and that stage area in the commons, making that one large, usable, multifunctional space, including like a coffee shop for kids, a vibe of, and I'm sure many of you folks have visited schools that have been either renovated or redone in recent time, where it's just much more of a vibe of a coffee shop or a restaurant versus the stark sort of, sit in rows at your cafeteria table sort of approach. It would also work for some multifunctional group presentations, and it's just much more of a usable space for our students when incorporated into the commons area, the cafeteria area, along with the volunteer center. The CTE is out of their area. What am I missing, Ron? What's
No, that's it. Speech and language moved to the house.
Oh, yeah.
People services would all be in one spot.
Yeah. Anyway, the aspects and the benefits for kids with regard, and the community with regard to using that space would be increased. So, although again, none of this is a done deal. This isn't like, here's what we're going to do and now let's put it on the, this is where we start the conversation on the topic. I can't emphasize that enough. But I also asked Dan to run numbers on a $30 million bond issue, which basically would entail just about everything we just talked about. And that impact with the $2 million levy override would push the mill rate, projected mill rate, if both were approved, a $2 million levy override and a $30 million bond issue, to a mill rate of 10, which is an increase on a $100,000 property of $91 per year. So instead of 15, the extra $30 million bond issue would boost it another $75, give or take, on a $100,000 property. And then I also said, run a $20 million bond issue, because I do think that the need to renovate the entrances of our facilities as far as the basement goes, and maybe modifying a couple of things at Lincoln High School if we were able to capture dollars to do that. The $20 million bond issue would be a mill rate, projected mill rate of a 10.1, which would change the tax on a $100,000 property with the $2 million bond issue to $105 more per year. So that's kind of the threshold. And once again, just for clarity's sake, I'm going to repeat what I just said, but just in a very succinct fashion. So if we did a $20 million bond issue and it was approved, next year the tax impact on a $100,000 property would be $15 per year. If we did a $2 million bond issue and a $20 million levy override referendum, the tax impact on a $100,000 property would be $105 per year. If we did a $2 million levy override referendum and a $30 million bond issue, the tax impact projected for next year on a $100,000 property is $150. So that just kind of encapsulates very briefly what those circumstances are. Steering back to my original point, and then I will finally shut up, I promise. I do feel that a levy override question in the very near future has to be asked of voters, so we can continue to maintain the quality of services and programs that we have, and we can expand and enhance our technology access for our kids. And this pandemic has once again highlighted the need for that, although even barring the pandemic, that need would still remain. Questions or comments?
I just think it should be noted that the 2006 referendum was a 5-year referendum. And this district and our administrators got that money the last 14 years. So that's pretty impressive because a lot of districts, they'll have a referendum and they've used most of their budget in the first 2 years. So the fact that they've done that is impressive, and the fact that we've been responsible as far as this district before even I started on the board, has been responsible enough to financially to help be cognizant of what our taxpayers pay and what they're getting for their dollar. The other part of it is that we talked about it when we make computer purchases. Windows 7 is obsolete and a lot of our computers still have Windows 7. So we have to upgrade those computers, and the life of technology, 5 years?
5 to 6.
Yeah. So 5 to 6 years you get out of a computer, and right now with our one-to-one, every year we're purchasing approximately 300 personal computing devices, Chromebooks basically, for each grade that comes into Lincoln. So, you know, there's the need for technology is not going to go away, and in our society, everything is technology. I mean, this cell phone has more computing capacity than any computer did 20 years ago. So the technology is there, and the fact that you need to do it, you know, it's not going to go away. And the levy override is a way of doing it and using the money wisely, and I think our district has done a good job of doing that.
I would also indicate that if you direct me to move forward with investigating these things and ramping up planning, shall we say, one of the things that at some point in the future I would argue should transpire would be an information dissemination to the community, followed by a public survey or an ability to comment on the viability of one or both questions as you folks see fit. For timeline-wise, you would not have to adopt resolutions to go to referendum until the January board meeting, and they would be on the April election cycle or the April ballot. So that's your timeline. And very clearly, as I mentioned at Ed Services, if we do move forward with this, there would be community information sessions. There would be, you know, Rotary and Kiwanis and you name it, visits with anybody and anyone willing to listen, municipalities, and so forth and so on.
Any other questions?
I would make a motion to approve of the administration exploring options for 2 potential levy override and bond issue referendum questions in the future, bringing back a recommendation for the board consideration in the future.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve of the administration exploring options for 2 potential levy override and bond issue referendum questions in the future, bringing back a recommendation for board consideration in the future. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
We'll probably, just for posterity's sake, have a standing committee, or a standing board agenda item, pardon me, that is simply update on referendum planning. And some months, like next, is probably gonna be, we got nothing, you know, but that way it'll stay on the forefront and everybody will be up to speed as appropriate.
Very good.
Thank you.
Last item tonight is discussion and possible action on a request from the city of Wisconsin Rapids to utilize the East Junior High Field House as an election polling place beginning with the November 3rd, 2020 election.
Yeah, so I was contacted by the city clerk who is looking for a polling place as a result of some changes within the city of Wisconsin Rapids. At the last election, I think they contacted me. I don't think they contacted me, I know they did. And they said if we can't, because they had used Shopko. They had evaluated using Shopko, and I believe Shopko must have allowed them to use Shopko as a polling place. But at that time, they said, we need a backup plan, because if Shopko says no, what can we do? And they were looking at maybe using East. And that request was just an emergency for that one time. And I said, well, if you get moving closer to that and you think it's going to happen, let me know, because I got to, you know, provide an update to the board and blah, blah, blah. From my understanding, based on, you know, having Maureen, who is the brains of the outfit, and a number of other things, the decision was made by the board in conjunction with the community to say it probably isn't super wise to have open voting with school in session in our facilities, because everybody votes, everybody can vote, and it really doesn't do a lot for school safety and security when you have the general public coming and going. And I tend to buy into that. But that then, of course, then limits the city with respect to public locations, or even locations in general, that they can do things like allow people to vote. I think we all know that East is not used to its fullest capacity, and it doesn't truly house student programs, pardon me, I can't talk, student programs 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. or anything like that. And voting takes place on days of the week, clearly, and they would be asking to utilize the field house, with which they would be responsible for any custodial fees incurred and so forth. But they would do the setup and takedown, and they would do the cleanup, and if we have any costs involved in it whatsoever, of course, that would be charged back to the city. But used as a polling place, things are taken down according to the city clerk. They're set on the sidewalk late that night or very early in the morning, and a city crew comes by and takes them, and we're probably not even going to know they were there. And we can limit access to the remainder of the building to a degree if people are coming and going from the field house. And so plus we don't have, our district offices are housed here, technology offices are housed here. We have enough adult human beings, school employees that are around, that if there's random people wandering the halls, we'll be made aware of it very quickly. But that area would be sequestered off, so they would have to go out of their way to kind of wander the building. Poll workers there would be there monitoring as well, and would know where people can and can't go. And so the request would be, can that be used? And they're wanting to use it with regularity. So like anytime the city has to have a polling place, that it would be used in that capacity. I think because of the circumstance, if it's couched in the idea around student safety, I think we've cleared that hurdle, but that's the only piece of the conversation that I'm aware of. So there may be more pieces at play, which is why you see it here before you.
Well, it is a public building.
It is.
And, unless something were to happen with the sale of the building, that there's renovations or remodel, I don't see any reason why the building couldn't be used as a polling place. I'm guessing the Shopco thing is problematic because who knows who the investors are that may own that building and what their plans are. And you'd have to heat it, you'd have to do all those things for one day. So I understand the ask.
Yep. And so, would it inconvenience a program or two? For example, we use the field house, the district has uses of the field house quite frequently, after school, the city does. For things like indoor pickleball and a number of other things. So it's not like it just sits there empty. It's used with regular frequency, but it would simply be blocked off for that day. And I think they take the day before, the afternoon before, the day of, and then the morning after. So it is going to be, up to a 3-day, space is unavailable if we would do that. But like you said, John, it's a public building, and it'd be a fairly minor inconvenience, I think, for our programs if that were the case.
And it can be completely locked off because I've been locked out of it, so.
I'm in agreement, so I think it would be a good thing. And if we sell it, well, good for us, and then they have to find someplace else.
Correct. The company that's interested in the old portion and renovating it for apartments or for units does not want anything to do with the field house. Because in renovating historic places, I think under statute, they're obligated. So like when you have a vast open void, like the field house, which is largely empty space, right? There's nothing in there. There's a gym floor and a bunch of ball hoops, that's it. But when it's largely empty space, it has to retain a certain percentage of that empty space upon renovation. So that limits what you can do with said space. It'd be pretty sweet theater, but aside from that, there's really not anything you could do with it. And so that's why they said, we really only want this 1913 portion of the building, the old, the Lincoln High School from back in the old days.
I think it's 31.
31, thank you. I transposed it in my head, 1931. Which is also the coolest part of the building. I think no one would debate that. But that's the only part they're interested in. And if that were the case, and I haven't heard from that outfit in quite some time, that to me would be the best of all possible scenarios, because us retaining use of that field house is huge. And frankly, not paying money to renovate a building or another area for district offices and technology offices makes all kinds of sense to me. There's nothing wrong with the portions that we're in, and they're functional and usable. If we were to move, anything that we move to, we're going to have to renovate and put money in, and that seems to me like not a wise move. If somebody were to come in and just say, I want the whole shebang, out, see ya, we can move on without too much of a problem. But if that would come to fruition, selling the old portion and having that renovated and still retaining some of these other aspects would be probably ideal. But we'll see what happens. And in the short term, no, there's not any field house.
John Dan is.
Because of the wood floor in the field house, I was wondering about the cafeteria. Would that be nicer location for it or not? Or would it not be large enough?
Wouldn't be big enough with social.
Shouldn't be big enough, okay.
Yeah, and with approval, what'll happen now is the city clerk and I and potentially Maureen or Ed or all of us will just walk through and we'll start to ferret out really what this is gonna look like. They have some concerns with regard to handicapped accessibility. She already knows that there'll have to be some ramps constructed that we put up temporarily because the field house is actually elevated slightly above the grade of the sidewalk. So if you're coming in the field house doors and going out another, you're gonna have to have ramps there. So they're gonna come and evaluate and take a look at it, but frankly, I mean, we've all voted before, I would imagine, and you don't really need a lot except for an open room and tables and people to staff it. So I think it'll fit the bill.
I would move to approve the request of the city of Rapids to utilize East Junior High Fieldhouse as an election polling place with the November 3rd, 2020 election.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the request from the city of Wisconsin Rapids to utilize the East Junior High Fieldhouse as an election polling place beginning with the November 3rd, 2020 election. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The only thing looking at the calendar, there's a LHS Wall of Fame committee meeting on the 29th at 9 a.m. And with that, we're adjourned until August. Thanks, everyone.